Picture the richest person you can think of. Now picture what they actually own. Not the house, not the jet, the actual source of it. The thing that generates the number. For most people alive today, that answer is something digital. A portfolio, a stake in a company, a number sitting inside a server, somewhere you've never been, managed by people you've never met. Now, and this is the part I want you to actually think about. Go back 3,000 years. You're the wealthiest person alive. Not kind of wealthy. We're talking the 1% of the 1%. The person other people write stories about. Here's the question. What do you actually own? What does your wealth look like? The real answer is stranger than you'd expect, and once you see it, the way you think about what wealth actually is will not be the same. Let's start at the very beginning, because this is where it gets interesting. The oldest form of wealth in recorded human history wasn't gold, it wasn't land, it wasn't even grain. It was cows, specifically livestock, cattle, sheep, goats. If you were rich in ancient times, you had animals. Lots of them. Roaming, breathing, reproducing animals. This isn't just a fun fact. It's buried in the language we still use today. The Latin word for money, pecunia, comes from pecu, which means cattle. The English word fee traces back to an old Germanic word for livestock. The word capital, as in capital gains, capital investment, the thing your financial advisor keeps talking about, comes from Latin caput, meaning head, as in a head of cattle. The language of modern finance is basically ancient livestock accounting with a fresh coat of paint. Economic historian David Graeber documented this in depth. The first 5,000 years cattle-based wealth systems predate coinage by thousands of years. You didn't measure wealth in coins. You measured it in animals. The Bible describes Abraham's wealth in livestock, cattle, donkeys, camels, sheep, not gold bars stacked in a vault, cows. In ancient Ireland, the primary unit of economic value wasn't currency, it was the baw, the cow. Legal contracts, fines, dowries, all calculated in cows. So if you were rich 3,000 years ago, your net worth mooed. But livestock was just the beginning, because as civilizations got more complex, wealth got more complex too. The second form of ancient wealth was land. And this sounds obvious. Land. Sure, everyone knows rich people owned land. But the way ancient land ownership worked is almost nothing like what we think of today. In ancient Mesopotamia, in Egypt, in Rome, you didn't own land the way you own a house today. There was no title deed sitting in a filing cabinet, no county register. In many cases, there wasn't even a clear legal system for individual land ownership. What you owned was the right to use the land, and what made that right real was your ability to enforce it, which meant you needed people. Which brings us to the third form of ancient wealth, and this is the uncomfortable one. People, slaves, serfs, bondsmen, laborers under obligation. The wealthiest people in the ancient world didn't just own land, they owned the labor that worked it. You couldn't separate the two. In ancient Rome, a wealthy senator's estate wasn't valued just by its acreage. It was valued by the number of slaves working it. A farm with no labor was just dirt. A farm with 200 enslaved workers was a revenue machine. Stanford historian Walter Scheidel, in his research on ancient inequality, estimated that at the peak of the Roman Republic, the wealthiest Romans held wealth almost entirely in land, slaves, and livestock. Coins and precious metals were a comparatively small part of the picture. So if you were the richest person in ancient Rome, your balance sheet looked something like this. A few thousand acres of farmland, a couple hundred people you owned, a few thousand animals, some grain stores, and a house in the city that was mostly for showing off. Not exactly what you'd put on a modern Forbes list. Here's where it gets genuinely strange. All of the things we just talked about, cattle, land, labor, they share one property that we have almost completely abandoned in modern wealth. They are all physical. They take up space, they require maintenance, they can die, burn down, or run away. Ancient wealth was heavy, it was loud, it ate food and needed water and sometimes got sick. And that created a problem that wealthy people have always had no matter the century. How do you store it? How do you protect it? How do you transfer it from one place to another without losing it? The answer, for thousands of years, was grain. Grain was the original liquid asset. It could be stored, measured, divided, and traded. In ancient Egypt, the state ran enormous grain warehouses, and the receipts you got for depositing grain could be used as currency. You could pay taxes with them. You could buy things with them. Ancient records from Mesopotamia, dating as far back as 3000 BCE, show grain receipt systems that were anything but casual. They were sophisticated, standardized, and looked functionally identical to early banking. And that's no accident, because the place that actually held those receipts, the place people trusted to store their most valuable things, was the temple. The temple was the bank. In ancient Mesopotamia, Babylon, Greece, temples didn't just handle religious affairs. They managed enormous economic operations. They stored grain, precious metals, tools, and livestock. They made loans, they charged interest. The priests weren't just priests, they were functionally the first bankers. But the scale of it goes deeper than most people realize. So let's pull this all the way forward, because here's what this history is actually showing us. Wealth has always been about one thing: control over resources that other people need. 3,000 years ago, that was cattle and land and grain, the things that kept people alive. If you controlled those things, you controlled people's survival, and that made you powerful. The form changed, the logic never did. In medieval Europe, it was land and serfs. In the industrial era, it was factories and raw materials. In the 20th century, it was oil, steel, and financial instruments. And today, think about what the wealthiest people in the world actually own in 2024. Jeff Bezos doesn't own cows. He owns infrastructure, the pipes through which enormous percentages of the world's commerce flows. Elon Musk owns satellites, rocket technology, social platforms, and communication networks. The Saudi royal family owns oil, which is, when you think about it, just a different kind of thing that keeps modern civilization running. The resource changed. The mechanism is identical. The richest people in every era of human history owned whatever other people could not function without. You couldn't put ancient wealth in a banking app, but if an ancient Roman senator could see the modern world, he would understand it immediately. Different assets, same game. So back to where we started. You're the richest person alive 3,000 years ago. What do you actually own? A few thousand animals, tens of thousands of acres of productive land, hundreds of people bound to work it, grain stores full enough to survive 5 bad harvests, and receipts held by a priest in a temple representing all of it. That is wealth. No app, no stock ticker, no quarterly earnings call, just things that are real, physical, and necessary for survival. Here's the thing I keep coming back to though. Every form of wealth we've talked about, cattle, land, labor, grain, temples, all of it, at some point in history felt permanent, felt like the natural shape of wealth, like it would always be this way. The Roman senator thought land and slaves were the obvious way to hold wealth forever. The medieval lord thought the same about his manor. The 19th century industrialist thought the same about his factories. None of them could see what was coming next, which makes you wonder, what does the person in 2050 look back at and think, how did they not see that was temporary? That's the question. And the answer, if history is any guide, is sitting right in front of us.